Thank you. Please, you can start your presentation. Until now,
paylaşımını alabilir miyiz acaba, video paylaşımını? Teknik ekipteki
Hacer Hanım,
arkadaşlardan. Buyurun.
Sahar Hanım bize herhangi bir video göndermemişti.
Mr. Sahar has not sent any video.
Tamam. Yo, sizin onay vermeniz yeterli hocam.
I will continue my presentation with my own screen, with my own computer. But I'm not allowed. Try again.
Olmadığı söyleniyor Ali hocam. Tamam. Peki. Buyurun. Tfaddalu.
Okay, you can start now.
كأن الصوت منخفض يا سيدة سهر.
تحتاجين أن cannot hear you.
Evet, ses noktasına yardımcı olabilir mi?
We cannot hear you. Yes. Can you raise the voice? Technical team.
Tamam.
Now it is better. In 1945, United Nations began its charter with 4 main goals based on human rights in order to respect human rights. But United Nations has not fulfilled. And now, does the United Nations have any or some of our goals? Is it possible to fix this? Is it possible to make global peace and global security? And especially for the Declaration of Human Rights, there is a court established, and with the social and economic structure, of course, we are respecting the laws. And of course, United States, you remember Hiroshima and Nagasaki with the dropping of bombs in Japan, and after that, in Germany, as a Security Council was established with the participation of France, and United Kingdom and France and Germany are the members of the United Nations, and these are the permanent representatives, as you know. And since the establishment of these countries, we always have faced the violation of human rights by those countries. And as you know, there are different blocks. As you can see on the screen, these are the green countries, which are the exploited countries by these Western powers. We have, you remember Warsaw Pact in 1955, and after that, NATO was established. And there was a war between Pakistan and India, and United Nations and United States supported this conflict. And with the support of the United Nations, there were many conflicts, like the collapse of Sudan, with the support of different countries. And we also have seen the collapse of the Soviet Union. There was a conflict between the two blocs. And also there was a conflict between France and the United States. These 5 countries, permanent representatives of they didn't want to stop the conflict between the United States and the Soviet Union. And the United Nations didn't resolve the conflict. And American nuclear missiles near the Soviet Union and Turkey, and the presence of Soviet nuclear missiles near America. And this meant the balance between 2 countries. And in 1947, the partition decision was issued to establish the state of Israel. And the United Nations recognized Israel in 1948, but they didn't recognize the state of Palestine. And to recognize a demilitarized Palestinian state, these 5 permanent members of the Security Council are still supporting Israel. And this is the reason of today's massacres. And of course, Vietnam War and the United Nations couldn't stop the American war against Vietnam for 20 years. And again, Soviet-Afghan War, American occupation of Afghanistan and Iraq, and American and Russian occupation of Syria. And United Nations couldn't have any resolution against any of these wars. And we still see the support of United States to Israel, and there is not any permanent decision taken so far. And United Nations has been unable to prevent the war by Israel against the Palestinian people. And again, America provided many arms to all countries, including Israel. And hostilities are still continuing, and it is really hard to take decision against Israel. And Israel is being supported by the United Nations, and it is really hard to achieve peace. In Pentagon and Ministry of Defense of the United Nations, they are not working, or they are not struggling to ensure peace in the world. And it is really hard to continue to establish permanent peace, because we are always seeing the violation of human rights, and we see people being displaced, and there is the right to immigrate for people if there is any war. And we see it is also present in the provisions of the United Nations Charter. And after the Second World War, a migration wave occurred in the Arabic countries. And in those days, refugee camps were established. And of course, the second issue is the right of religion. We see still Islamophobia in the Western countries. You see the trend of Islamophobia. And it is really hard for these countries. And most of the Muslim people are deemed as terrorists, and Hamas group is also deemed as terrorists in the world by the United States and the European Union. And these liberal organizations are terrorists in their eyes. It is not terrorism. They are trying to liberate their countries. And furthermore, United Nations is supporting interest, and they're also supporting LGBTs, unfortunately, and they are not paying attention to the institution of family. They are supporting deviant groups, perverted groups. And of course, they are supporting deviant trends for the children as well. For example, related to marriage as women rights, they are violating Islamic law. United Nations is against the Islamic law. Under the name of human rights, there are many NGOs established, and they are actually against the understanding of family in Islam. And these are all against the national state sovereignty. And United Nations is not respecting national laws and the internal affairs. In 1947, as I've just stated, they recognized Israel as a state. Now, when the United States, there is a support morally and materially for the Zionist groups and militarily as well. And they are not abiding by the law and the rules of the United Nations. And other than that, the condition of the independence of Egypt and Sudan, and Sudan was separated into two groups, to the south and north, South Sudan and North Sudan. And United Nations peacekeeping forces came to divide Sudan. And in 2023, United Nations failed to fulfill its mission again, and a war broke out between the army. And there are two Sudanese governments now. And especially for the international law, we still see the violation of the international law. And we see that the state of Israel and the actions of the state of Israel are supported. And we see in Sudan, in Syria, the sovereignty of the countries were not supported. And the United Nations politics to divide Sudan, Iraq, Syria, Libya, Yemen is still continuing. And again, International Monetary Fund, IMF, is the agency of the United Nations, and it was established by an international treaty in 1944, and IMF and World Bank have partnerships with different countries. But still, we see that they are trying to impose its economic power on different countries. For example, there are many poor countries as a result of the policies of IMF, and Ghana removed customs tariffs on food imports in accordance with the IMF's instructions. And Zambia did the same, agreed to the terms of the fund and removed the tariff. There are different examples on that. And they are harming the imports of wheat, of clothing. And right now, these countries are dependent on the United States. And some of the countries cannot have the wheat or the necessary production. And we see there are interests imposed on these countries by the IMF. It is like the arm of liberal capitalism represented by United States to control their forces and economies. And there are, for the stock exchanges of these countries, they are trying to manage the economy and the economic sovereignty of many countries. Because for the banks, especially World Bank, they are providing loans to these countries and they are imposing sanctions afterwards, economic sanctions, because they have to abide by all the rules of the World Bank and IMF as they are under that. And of course, United Nations has its own objectives. The main objective of the United Nations is to achieve peace and security. So in Sudan, in Palestine, in Ukraine, in Syria, in Iraq, in Yemen, we don't see any achieved peace and security. And has the United Nations achieved, I ask you once again, and human rights? United Nations said that there will be no human rights violations, but now, as UNHCR stated, human rights violations reach up to 108 million people at the end of 2022. And for the respect of law and sovereignty of the state, there are still 1 billion people who are under threat. And we also have seen that United Nations supported combatants in different countries. And after the Second World War, United Nations was established. So the rest of the world countries were included later on. And in the permanent representatives, among the permanent representative countries, there is not any Muslim country. And if a Muslim country is not included into the permanent representation of the United Nations, then permanent peace and security cannot be established in the world. And of course, if there is any party violating the rights of the other party, there should be a sanction against the violator. And of course, for example, Egypt. Egypt is one of the Muslim countries in this direction. Thank you very much for watching us, for listening to me.